Ladies and gentlemen, joining me right now is Richard Perle, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, and former Chairman of the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board. Richard, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. All right, so much to talk about. Of course, the world was rocked, or at least the media was rocked yesterday when it was revealed that Donald Trump gave classified information to the Russian foreign minister when he met with him in the Oval Office a few days ago about an ISIS plot to blow up planes with bombs stuck in computers. Today we had McMaster, I thought very eloquently and gracefully and forcefully explaining and defending the president. What was your take, and what is your take on what took place from the president to the Russians?
Well, I read the Washington Post article very carefully and thought it was outrageously overblown. There was no indication in the article, and this is now confirmed by the National Security Advisor, that any classified information that was not either known or obvious was revealed in that conversation. This seems to me another example of parts of the mainstream press were clearly, unambiguously out to destroy this presidency. And they will make mountains out of molehills, and they'll create molehills out of nothing. So I was not at all concerned about that, and I spent 50 years consuming and working on highly classified information.
Right. No, you know what? It just seems that, as you say, the media is on a mission, and no matter what happens, and when they're given something like this, they're going to say the end of the world. I mean, Alan Dershowitz even said that this is the most serious thing a president has ever done.
Well, clearly, I don't believe that. I don't think any significant information has been compromised. It's ironic that the Washington Post and the New York Times should be in a fit about this, since they have both published classified information for years, and sometimes quite dangerously.
Yeah, well, that is a little ironic, and that was addressed. And I don't want to skip over everything else, but I will skip to that. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, General McMaster, said today that national security is put at risk by these kinds of leaks. How on earth do you think, Richard, with just a limited number of people in the room? I know there's someone, apparently I found out, through reports, that takes notes, and I guess those notes go out. But I mean, there weren't many people that had access to that meeting, were there? But maybe more that had access eventually to the notes. Is that it?
Well, the number of people who nominally and officially have access to classified information is often a fraction of those who in reality have access, because someone will prepare a memo, a memcon, or send a cable, and it gets reproduced. We have a very sloppy system for controlling classified information. And the most serious classified information is hand-carried. It is read by the recipient and then taken away. And no notes are taken. We can handle, on a selective basis, very sensitive information carefully. But in this instance, I don't believe that information requiring that kind of handling was in any way involved.
So you don't believe it was treated as such. So when McMaster says today that, hey, the president sat down and he addressed the tough issues with the Russians, he addressed Syria, he addressed Ukraine, and then the president being the president, he said, hey, we also have shared interests here, including fighting ISIS, which he's made clear throughout the campaign and throughout his early presidency. And of course, the plane was shot down. The Russian plane was shot down, over 200 killed by ISIS in October of 2015. So the president says, I have this information regarding, another plot by ISIS to take down planes. You see that as McMaster said, being totally appropriate.
Yes, I do. And as a matter of fact, we've all been reading in the open press reports on efforts to protect against the use of laptop computers as explosive devices. So this was hardly a revelation. I'm quite sure that the Russians know as much as we do, and possibly even more.
If it was Israel, as the New York Times is now saying, that was the provider of the information to the United States about these ISIS plans to blow up commercial airliners, and McMaster said Donald Trump did not know who the provider was. But if it was Israel, let's say as the third party, do you believe, because McMaster said it won't, do you believe it will give them pause to provide any future information?
No, I don't. We've been sharing intelligence with a great many countries, including Israel, for a very long time. It's an important flow of information in both directions, and neither the United States nor Israel would wish to see an interruption in that flow of information. So I don't think it will have any effect at all.
All right. Speaking of Israel, the president is headed to the Middle East, and there's some I guess, news on a couple of fronts. McMaster was also asked, because there was a report, there were two reports that troubled me. One was that an advanced representative of the president's trip in Israel made a comment that the president will have no Israeli politicians or officials with him at the Western Wall when he goes to visit there, because this isn't your land, it's part of the West Bank. Which the White House then, when they heard about it, they said it was inappropriate, it was unauthorized. But McMaster was asked today, will there be any Israeli politicians or officials with the president? McMaster said no. When he was asked twice if they considered, the U.S. considers the Western Wall part of Israel, he kind of avoided the question. The first time he ignored it, the second time, in my view, he skipped around it. So talk about those two statements and non-statement, if you will, and does that concern you?
Well, the initial statement almost certainly came from a State Department person involved in preparations for the trip, because that is typical of the State Department view on things. It is not typical of the president's view. And I believe that if Donald Trump is asked directly, does he consider the Western Wall to be part of Israel, he will answer in the affirmative. I don't think he'll dance around that.
Why?
The diplomats have been dancing around this forever, and will go on doing so.
Is there
Whether McMaster was briefed to be cautious about this, I don't know, but I would be astonished if the president would accept the idea that the Western Wall is not part of Israel.
Okay, well, is there any significance to making the point today, and apparently that will be what will happen, that there will be no Israeli officials with the president at the Western Wall? If in fact,
I think we have to wait and see more of this story. There may well be reasons for not having politicians there that have nothing to do with a position in principle on whether the Western Wall is part of Israel. The Western Wall was, of course, on the other side of the 1967 boundaries. But anyone who believes that Israel is going to give up the Western Wall doesn't understand the first thing about this situation. So while there are diehards who will take the view that because the Western Wall was liberated during the 1967 war, it may go back to the Palestinians or someone else.
Well, it should go back to Jordan, because I think that's who they won it from, but go ahead.
Well, yes, that's quite right. It's not going back, and I don't believe the president believes it's going back, and I don't think this dancing around the issue makes any sense. One
more for you. There's a report that I'm reading here from Fox News that some Gulf states are warming up to Israel. They don't consider Israel an enemy, but rather an opportunity. And they see a possibility of a Palestinian peace deal now with Trump in place. And one of the proposals that's being bandied about, which sounds, hey, pretty good until you think of it, but you tell me. They say the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis reportedly would allow Israel planes to fly through their airspace and enable direct communications with Israel if Israel stops building settlements in the West Bank and eases trade restrictions in the Gaza Strip. To me, that latter one is almost a bigger red flag than the former, but you tell me.
Well, of course, there are a lot of ways to interpret the easing of trade restrictions. What the Israelis do with respect to trade is they attempt to prevent the importation of lethal equipment.
Absolutely.
So it's a security measure, and they're certainly not going to abandon that. There is a de facto alliance between Israel and those Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, for example, who are threatened by Iran. And I think this was, as much as anything, a message to the Iranians that whatever their calculations about how they would deal with an Israeli reprisal in the event of a conflict, the Israelis would not be forced to avoid Gulf country airspace. On the contrary, they would be welcomed.
Very interesting. Richard Perle, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, my friend. Thank you very much.
All the best to you, Steve.
You too. Richard Perle, ladies and gentlemen. I urge all of you out there to check out NewsmaxTV.com and, of course, Newsmax.com, and we will see you soon.